where not just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history, what body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psychology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out. Friday Java, our magazine program on the 20th of October 2017 from WBRN Radio in Boston and on the Boston Red Network. Incidentally, we've added a new program to the Boston Red Network that's been around for a number of years now. You don't hear about it as much. It's called BR on the World. It's our international affairs program. We kicked this particular rendition of the series off with the 19th Party Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. That was General Secretary Xi presenting a report to the party at its preliminary in Beijing on the 18th, I believe it was, of October. Very important speech in terms of where the Chinese nation will be in 2035 and onward, and their ambition to further socialism, as the Secretary Xi said, with a Chinese characteristic. That is a basic tenet of Marxism-Leninism, that socialism within a country is characterized by the history of that country. There is not as one would say, a cookie-cutter approach to socialism, something that decided a long time ago. There was some contrivancy between the Marxist-Leninists and a sect called the Trotskyists. The Trotskyists are still around in some diminished capacities, but they were primarily used during the Cold War in the U.S. as an outlet for anti-communism along with the Republican Party. So nothing was new there. We have, of course, tragic news out of Florida, Miami, and the Miami Gardens. Sergeant Johnson and his treatment not only where he was killed in Niger, but also the shabby treatment, rather niggardly, by the Trump administration. We'll get to that. We'll start this off, we usually don't, but we'll start this off with a report from the University of Virginia. That's Dr. Larry Sabato's shop there in Charlottesville. And we'll also report on what happened in Gainesville, Florida. Spencer, the white supremacist, was there. Of course, the University of Florida, over $500,000. The governor declared a state of emergency there in Gainesville to accommodate this character. About 15 of his supporters, that's Spencer, the alt-right operative, akin to the former chief strategist for DJ Trump's White House, Bannon. So we have a number of things to look at here. We also have some polling, a Fox poll on the more Jones race in Alabama. We've covered that particular race there in Alabama and some more updated stuff. Now, from the University of Virginia, this is actually a report on the House of Delegates. We debated on how much of this we would bring. This is by Godfrey Skilling. He's the associate editor there at the Crystal Ball. But it is important to at least give it a cursory look here with the November political spotlight will shine brightly on the gubernatorial race as the race between Ed Gillespie and the lieutenant governor there, Ralph Northam. Now, the Northam race, Barack Obama, the former president, will appear there on behalf of Ralph Northam. We have some recent polling on that race. We'll take a look at it. Nonetheless, a down ballot, they call it, in the Old Dominion on Election Day. Not only their elections for the Commonwealth's two other statewide offices, Lieutenant Governor and the Attorney General there. There's 100 House of Delegates seats that will be up for grabs. The General Assembly's lower house will probably take a different, will look different after the 7th of November, but the question is how different. As things stand now, the Republicans hold a 66 to 34 edge over the Democrats in the House of Delegates, meaning that the Democrats must win 17 seats to retake it. Not shocking, the Crystal Ball coincidentally said that the Republicans will maintain control of the chamber. In fact, Northam admits in as much at a dinner recently there, the current House Majority Leader, Kurt Cox, becoming a Speaker of the House. The current Speaker, Bill Howell, is retiring, and Cox is the presumptive replacement. Now, this is Virginia politics. We won't get a lot into who Cox is, because we don't know. Like the Wu-Tang Clan, incumbents seem to hold on to office in the past because of their larger campaigns. War chest. Now, that has been brought up, and that is pretty much bared out in the House of Representatives, although in the House we continue to see the wrong track, right track House ratings around, this is the U.S. House of Representatives, around 20% or so. But even with that, 95 plus of the representatives are re-elected. Very few upsets there. Using data from the Virginia Department of Elections and the Public Access Project, I looked at the elections and campaign finance data from 1997 to 2015. The data reiterates the point that incumbents typically win and outspend opponents. In the 10 regular election cycles in that time period, 1,000 House of Delegate elections took place. In those, 891 incumbents ran in the general election. 863 of them won. That's 97%. That is about the same with the U.S. House. Not much difference there. In terms of campaign finance, we used the data let's see, 380 Democrats versus Republican contest in the House of Delegates in this period to see how having more campaign cash to win. The traditional importance of it in Virginia politics. Remember, Virginia really has no campaign finance limitations. A donor can give as much as he or she wants, which is basically what Citizens United has done for the entire U.S. Election cycle, which presents the winning percentage for candidates who outspent the opponents in Democratic contests. In other words, it's bought and paid for them. Winning for House delegates who outspent opponents, 93.1%. Candidates who spent more in open seats, 71.3%. Challengers who outspent incumbents, only 16.7%. Skipping down here, you can't see the charts. The principal reason why there are more contested races than in recent cycles is the fact that the Democrats are running in 88 seats, which is far more than in the past two gubernatorial cycles. We had 67 in 2013, 70 in 2009. Now, this is a trend that is happening throughout the country. This is back to maxim put out by Howard Dean, the presidential candidate one time, and he was chair of the Democratic National Committee to run candidates nationwide. And the Democrats are back to this now. You see the contest in red Alabama. The theory behind this is basically what's happening in Texas. You run candidates, you don't necessarily win in the first few contests, but you establish name recognition of the party and the party's programs. And eventually your numbers improve, as we saw the numbers for Hillary and Monster Clinton in the state of Texas in 2016. So those things happening. Also, we saw improvements in a special election in South Carolina that very little money was put into. And this whole situation in Alabama between Judge Moore and Mr. Jones is a case in point. Various polls have shown Judge Moore ahead by as much as 5 to 8 points. And the recent poll have it deadlocked, but there's about 11% undecided there. And where the undecided go in a state like Alabama, difficult. That's the age-old question. Will they go with the GOP party, in other words, Judge Moore, or will some of that group go to Mr. Jones? Very, very difficult to say there. And we'll get to Judge Moore in a minute here, because Democrats need to win 17 seats in the House of Delegates. Another statistic related to the 2016 presidential contest provides symmetry, business term, with the needed minority party. The Hillary Clinton carried 17 districts that are currently occupied by GOP incumbents in the House. Now, Democrats will not win all 16 of those seats. In fact, a fantastic cycle for them might mean winning roughly half of those seats. So effectively about 8 or 9, 7 or 8, I guess you'd say, that the Democrats could win. Going into the 2009 cycle, the Republicans held a 53 to 45 advantage in the House of Delegates, with 2 independents who caucused with the GOP. But they won 6 net seats and then consolidated their gains with the GOP-drawn districts. Now, this is where redistricting played into the scenario, even though the current governor, that's Terry McAuliffe, he won in 2013 cycle. There was almost no change in the makeup of the House of Delegates, with Democrats improving from 32 to 33. Not much improvement there. And we'll skip on down here, because these are local personalities. Some of what the Democrats are targeting in certain areas there. The I-95 corridor, they've been working there for some time. So that's where things have changed. House District 42, held by Dave Albo. He got out of the re-election business. The district being a district Barack Obama won by 7 points in 2012, and the Hillary Clinton by 23 points there. So we'll see how that district turns out there. Kathy Tran won a competitive primary there, is 42. A Republican here would be fairly surprising. Wait a minute here. Moving on to high-ranking Democratic seats here, and this is kind of hit and miss here because, again, these are local personalities here, and we won't spend very much time on them as to who they are and they're not. Northern Virginia, that has always been a fertile ground for Democrats, is getting attention. Let's see, HD 13, where now this is a transgender, is a challenge to social conservative. Defending the seat is a longtime Bob Marshall, who co-sponsored the Marshall-Newman Amendment, which banned gay marriage in Virginia. That was in 2006, after 57% of the voters backed it. Marshall reintroduced a bathroom bill aiming at preventing transgender individuals from using public bathrooms. Democratic primary here, Dorsey Roman, a transgender woman who won a party's nomination to face Marshall. Gwen Rome's profile, her candidacy has received a great deal of coverage. We had not. So these are some things that come out here. We'll see where that race goes with Marshall. Two of Northern Virginia seats of note, 31 and 51, in the former Elizabeth Guzman is taking on Langfeller, who Langfeller is there, and another Democrat there. Anyway, the need is still there. In Northern Virginia are probably the most disheartened by their choice. Anyway, I'm not sure what that is. So here's a conclusion. Much depends on what happens at the top of the ticket. In the last few days, there has been a poll showing Northam up in the double digits. I think we talked about that. Northam is modest, but hardly overwhelmingly favored. That would be kind of interesting. That's why Barack Obama is going there. The margin of error, we are not certain about that. Anyway, we'll go to Florida next here, and Miami Gardens, and Sergeant Johnson. This is in the Miami Herald there in Florida, about the soldier killed there, David Terrence Johnson, a central figure in the war of words between the congressman, our own congressman there, Ms. Wilson. He was a 25-year-old decorated soldier, one of 4 killed on October the 4th. This is how far back this goes in Niger. He worked for the retailer Walmart, of all places. And he had an extended family, and he left Maisha, that was his wife. And it all revolves around Frederica Wilson said that DJ Trump had insulted his 24-year-old widow, telling her he knew what he signed up for. But when it happened, it hurts anyway, when he called to offer the condolences. Now, this was heard on a speakerphone in the back of the limo, as they were leaving, on the way to the Miami International Airport. Now, this is consistent with what DJ Trump has said in the past. If you remember his whole conversation around Senator John McCain. John McCain, of course, being a decorated warrior, being imprisoned in Vietnam. And effectively what DJ Trump said, well, he was imprisoned, so therefore he's not amounted the type of respect because he got captured. And so this would be the kind of off-the-cuff comment from a DJ Trump. He was defended by Kelly, the chief of staff who lost a son in Afghanistan. But Kelly himself is not the type of person that we would look to. Mr. Johnson was born on the 2nd of January, 1992. His mother died early, and he was raised by his extended family there, period. Now, Representative Wilson, she's 74 years old. She is a fourth-term congressman known. She wears a colorful cowboy hats, and you've seen her before. Around, as a boy, Johnson loved to turn bicycle tricks, so he earned the name Wheelie. I was looking at a YouTube video of him literally riding a bike with only the back wheel, and it talks about it here. And when we do a tribute to him, we'll have a little bit of that audio. That was when the body was returned to the Miami International Airport. In 2014, he decided the way to do that was to join the Army. He enlisted with his family hosting a small get-together for him. There was food, drink, and people came. So he was trained at Fort Bragg. He received a Global War on Terrorism Service Medal. Some of the things they give out these days to people. Of course, he left behind a 6-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son, La David Jr. He was with the 3rd Special Force Group out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And they were working in Niger. And the whole episode was a botched operation there in Niger. We'll have a picture of Representative Wilson here. Representative Wilson is known. She represents a district in North Miami-Dade and southern Broward counties. And she's known for defending her constituents. And Miami Gardens, incidentally, is the same area that Trayvon Martin came out of. There's a picture of his little girl there. She's 6 years old. You can see how heartbreaking that would be. Wilson has awaited the national spotlight, according to this, and this is back to 2012 when Trayvon Martin was murdered by the murderer Zimmerman while visiting a relative in Central Florida. Martin grew up and attended high school in Wilson's district, and the Congresswoman made a point to insert herself as a voice against the Stand Your Ground legislation in Florida. So in other words, DJ Trump has his hands full there, period. Wilson took to the House floor, made a speech in Washington, Florida, designated to draw attention to the fatal shooting. Yesterday, I promised that I would come to the floor of the House of Representatives and announce to America just how long justice for Trayvon Martin has been delayed. Trayvon Martin was murdered 26 days ago, and there, of course, had been no arrest. At first, they didn't even bother to arrest the murderer Zimmerman. So you can understand what is going on here in this district. People in the district dislike the Governor Scott and DJ Trump vehemently. They elect you to make sure that everyone believe in it doesn't happen. 80% of the district feels this way, and that statement was made by Randall Hill. He's a former University of Miami football player who unsuccessfully challenged Wilson. I'm not sure what that was all about, but that is in Florida. And what we have, we'll look at see if there's any update here, and then we'll go to and look at some of the polling, and we'll come back as we move around here. This morning we'll look at some of the articles out of the Washington Post. A headline here: Russian general fought the mob. Why does he own $38 million of Florida real estate? Not unusual. A lot of characters own there. Let's do this Puerto Rico story. Incidentally, Bernie Sanders, the candidate of the people in 2016, will be in Puerto Rico to talk with the mayor. He was also slated to address a women's conference in, I believe, in Detroit. He wasn't able to get there, but nonetheless, there's some controversy even with the women's conference as to why Bernie would have been the major speaker. But again, that goes on. This is Hurricane Maria. Tore through the rest of the island. It came to the mayor there, Jorge Masquez, his home. The storm ripped through the plastic shutters. We won't go into what happened with the mayor, but it's just basically a month has passed since Maria ravaged Puerto Rico, and the island continues to operate in emergency mode, struggling to do even the basic things: save lives, protect property, provide drinking water, turn on the lights. Time ticks away with the haze of a state permanent disaster, catastrophe born from the worst storm to come to Puerto Rico in 83 years. The blame for unsatisfactory response, the Miami Herald and the Puerto Rican Center for Investigative Journalism found that lies with bureaucrats that were unprepared for the collapse of the communication system and overwhelmed by the logistics challenges, aiding an island left with no corner unturned. The White House appeared indifferent to the needs of 3.4 million American citizens 1,000 miles from its shore. Above all, strapped finances that plagued the island into an economic tailspin long before the winds arrived and left the government so thinly stretched it could not maintain its power grid or afford extensive preparations. Much remains to be learned about the recovery flaws of Maria, but disaster managers already know that historic storms, which require more FEMA food and water distribution than any other disaster, will force them to rethink how they approach a worst-case scenario disaster, just like Katrina. And this response if this response had been perfect, you would still have very significant suffering. That's from Marco Vegas Rubio. And see what else we find here. Puerto Rico never had a large emergency stash, and not much more could fit in a warehouse. That's obviously out there. Puerto Rico opened 500 emergency shelters ahead of Maria, a record number that didn't draw many evacuees until the rain actually started and people seemed to accept the storm might really be a bad one. At their peak, it reached 15,000. Rosello here said he was hamstringed by Puerto Rico's measly coffers. In other words, money is just simply not there. Major disaster declaration had been paid in full by the state, which is a $72 billion debt under control of the federally appointed fiscal board. Then, in contrast, 6 days before Irma hit Florida, the state filed its first request through the Emergency Mutual Aid Compact available states and territory. Florida ultimately made 99 requests before landfall. The number of requests from Puerto Rico before Maria, 0. The power grid was bankrupt, and it was $9 billion in debt. So this is just the whole situation there. The New York Power Authority did send crews the day after the storm there and asked for help there. Whitefish later contacted Jacksonville's public utility and some others. Also hired 66 local contractors. Communication early centered on saving lives. FEMA provided 16 urban search and rescue teams. No one in government has a full picture of how dire things were. Before requesting federal aid, states tradition rely upon the federal government relies upon states. That in itself has to be replaced. The morning after, when the National Guard finally made it to San Juan's hangar to fetch a helicopter, they found it was swept away by the storm, so there was nothing there. Literally. So, I mean, this is a whole story of, and that particular weekend, a golfing weekend, the governor of Puerto Rico in charge of the travail of sorts with the federal coordinating La Campa, and a state coordinating officer named Abner Gomez. Gomez would be officially replaced, and on the 11th, La Campa would be replaced also. So these characters, it's just a mess. Period there. So this is some of the problems that happen with the leadership there. The National Guard itself, which activated 8,000 members, but only 4,500 could report to duty. They couldn't get there because they couldn't get any transportation. So in other words, just a long story of things. DJ Trump visited on the 3rd, spending 4 hours in San Juan. He knew he was there that long. Said Maria hadn't been a real catastrophe like Hurricane Katrina. And the various mayors here, mayor being outspoken in San Juan. So that is the update there. Let us move on here. And we won't have time to do Salt Lake City. We will. This is from Reuters. Obamacare whiplash leaves state insurers with dueling price plans. This is one of the problems that happens because of DJ Trump's actions. When will enrollment will begin? In 2 weeks. Trump says his administration will stop paying billions of dollars in subsidies. Another cheap trick. Since then, he has alternately supported and dismissed efforts as the compromise by the senator from Kentucky, and the senator from Washington State. He's still working on campaign promises now to repeal and replace. Now, this in itself is something not seen in politics, because people understand, even Trump supporters, even those that were termed the undesirables, but campaign promises are nothing more than rhetoric. They're not based on solid practices, period. So the subsidies are up in the air. They may never appear. In California, it's considered a request by the Attorney General there to keep the subsidies flowing until a legal challenge is resolved. Congressional Budget Office said Republican president's policies to roll back the Obamacare enrollment efforts would lead to 4 million fewer people signing up. So we're beginning to get some numbers out here. The CBO expects 11 million people to sign up for next year, an increase from this year's enrollment of 10 million. It could be more than that. It's becoming on progressive organizations to get the word out to people across the board. The government has already halted the subsidy payment for October. The chief executive of Anthem Incorporated, insurance organization, Joseph Swedish, told Reuters he could not yet predict how ending the subsidies and restarting them, though probably congressional action would affect the pricing next year. And so, in other words, they really don't know. The subsidies restored at the time. Now, November 1st is the target date to enroll. Must be able to revert to the lower premium rates and provide rebates for customers. This is what insurance people have to do. Washington State insurance regulators said it would allow insurers to change rates as soon as practical, even next month. The National Association of Insurance Commissioners reinstated a fund applied block. Anyway, the Affordable Care Act does not allow for changes to premium rates after they have been finalized. An official of the Department of Health and Human Services said at the same time the administration is working to approve higher rates in several states that did not take into account the subsidies. Let's go move on here. Nursing, and this is out of Morgantown, West Virginia. A shortage of nurses in U.S. medical centers hits West Virginia. Now, this will hit more in West Virginia. To keep operations intact, the Charlotte Medical is spending $12 million on visiting traveling nurses, twice as many as 3 years ago. Had a friend that was a traveling nurse in California. I've been a nurse for 40 years, and the shortage is the worst I've ever seen. That is from Ron Moore, who retired in October from his position as Vice President and Chief Nursing Officer at the Charlotte area medical incentives, even tuition reimbursements for nursing students who commit to work at the hospital for 2 years. It's better to pay a traveler than shut a bed. So you're getting literally people turning into travelers. The cost for traveling nurses nearly doubled over 3 years to $4.8 billion in 2017. That is from Staffing Industry Analysis, a global advisor on workforce issues. The burden falls disproportionately on hospitals serving rural communities, where many of the DJ Trump supporters are, along with West Virginia, border with Pennsylvania. The W.D. Ruby Memorial Hospital in Morgantown is spending $10.4 million in 2017, compared with $3.6 a year ago. So this is some of the courses. In reality, what is happening. Nursing shortages have occurred in the past, but the current crisis is far worse. That's according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Estimates there will be more than 4 million registered nurse openings in 2024. So we're in 17 right now. So many young people should get ready and get into nursing. Hospitals seek to meet goals, calling for 80% of nursing staff to have 4-year degrees. That's up 50% from 2010 by 2020. So that's within 3 years. That has been a trend in many places, moving from the shabby 2-year programs that we saw in the 80s to a 4-year program now. In Birmingham has invested millions to attract nurses, but still has 300 jobs to fill. So in other words, there are jobs there. Last year, medical centers covered nearly $200 million in on-reimbursed medical costs for patients. It spent $4.5 million for visiting nurses. That's fiscal 2016, including $3 billion for post-surgical services, compared with $858,000. Now, that is in Birmingham, Alabama. So you kind of understand in rural Geneva, I think I'm mispronouncing that. That's in Missouri. That's a 25-bed medical center, the home of the infamous Rush Limbaugh. Small hospitals find it much harder to compete in the climate. More than 40% of rural hospitals have negative operating margins. That was in 2015. They've closed beds, but hired less experienced nurses, raised salaries, turned away at least one patient. So they have to go someplace else. We had the Gainesville, Florida, I think that's back there. Nonetheless, so we'll get this on the week, but was that this character, Spencer, Richard Spencer, showed up in Gainesville, Florida, with the rest of his neo-Nazi associates. They had people in khakis with white T-shirts with Nazi symbols on their T-shirts. About 15 showed up dressed. That was in white shirts and khaki pants. That was all that showed up. Hundreds of protesters showed up, and there was shouting matches there, no doubt about it. And we earlier lamented the cost of hiring security, etc., for the particular situation here. Let's get Roy Moore in here, and charity promise back pay to Roy Moore was not reported to the IRS. Now, this is the Alabama charity led by Judge Moore. Didn't report to the Internal Revenue Service in 2011. It guaranteed him almost $500,000, $498,000 in back pay, according to income report provided to the Washington Post. Disclosure would have triggered a federal tax bill of more than $100,000. So Roy's got some problems there. That's the foundation of moral law, said Moore once told him that he had sought advice on the financial arrangement from an accountant. Moore said he was told the compensation was not taxable until he cashed in the pay. Moore has not yet done so, he said. The issue is the latest in a series of questions about the financial ties, and that came up incidentally in the campaign with Luther Strangelove, otherwise known as Big Luther. Moore served as the president of the charity from 2007 to 2012, working 20 hours a week. That's what it showed he worked. With an annual salary of $180,000. Not the only type of arrangement there. The charity gave him a promissory note. That's for basically almost $500,000. David Walker, he's a tax professor of tax law at Boston University, said IRS rules for compensation are complex, but he said it appears more as financial transactions which a charity became taxable the moment he was given the right to demand payment or foreclose on the group's building. I didn't know a building was there. The full story of all this, of the same distortions and innuendos that characterized past attacks on Judge Moore. Alabama voters will see through it. Now, this was released, I guess, by the Moore campaign. Well, I suppose we'll see right there where all of this goes. So there are other machinations here. One of the big problems about IRS rulings until the actual ruling comes and the tax is paid back. Especially correct, Moore did not pay taxes on the income. He and the Foundation for Moral Law could over a variety of taxes, interest, and payments. Now, interest and penalties. Now, that is where the rubber will meet the road in this situation. But that won't be figured out until after the election is over. This is news to me. I never heard of Roy Moore LLC. Bentley said he was a foundation employee. Why would we come up with an $880,000 salary? This is Bentley. He was a board member. Said the organization was essentially run by the Moore family and had faulted himself for providing little oversight. He expressed a surprise when he learned the post that Moore was a paid contractor. So in other words, a lot of machinations in that. They may never be figured out. We told a story of General Kelly, the Chief of Staff, and Representative Frederica Wilson. Kelly is defending his boss, DJ Trump, and that is where that situation is, as to whom you believe or whom you do not believe. We also talked about early Bernie Sanders. We'll get this. The statement was issued by his office that I want to apologize to organizers. This is of the Women's Convention for not being able to attend the conference next Friday. Now, he will be in San Juan with Mayor Carmen Cruz, and to determine the best way forward to deal with the devastation in Puerto Rico. Now, the convention is scheduled for the 27th to 29th. It's the first major event since the Women's March, and we'll get to that every Friday Java. We open up with LaDonna talking about the Women's March. So we're very cognizant of what's announced, the news about Sanders bowing out, saying a humanitarian crisis is a critical matter, no doubt about that. Representative Maxine Waters will be there. No doubt she'll have plenty to say. Period. And so we sort of look to that. And let me just make sure we get the schedule up here in the broadcast. This will be national. It's in Detroit, Michigan, a good place to have it. Linda LeSueur, an organizer of the Women's March, said the organization, the original march the day after the inauguration of DJ Trump. The October convention will be more about instruction, training, and informing people of how to be effective leaders. There are people still fired up. So far, 2,300 people have registered for the convention. The organizers expect upward of 3,000 to attend the convention. It's roughly about $300 to register. Goes on to $2,525. Our own Tamika when you look at Detroit, there's no better place to hold it than Manly there. She used to be with Dr. Sharpton's National Action Network. The planning of the original march exposed race, social, economic, and political rifts within the feminist movement. But it was all Tamika took care of it. We're excited about and working hard to make sure that this conference is one that really gives women and our allies an opportunity. We'll cover this, incidentally, a well-oiled machine in this resistance movement and this moment. Tarika Mallory said there, get Tamika's name right there. Well, very little we can say about what happened in Chicago in the 9-1 victory of the Los Angeles Dodgers. We congratulate them over our Cubs. They have now made it to the World Series. They will be awaiting the winner of the Houston Astros Yankees game. They will play tonight in Houston, Texas. And that series, we'll see where it ends up. Houston will be able to win it all, or they will not. Let me just make sure I get this right as to the number of games here. We won't go into Clayton Kershaw or Mr. Hernandez, who was this will be the Dodgers' first trip to the LA Dodgers. That is to the Big Dance since 1988. We remember that vividly now. Tommy Lasorda was at the gun, was there. And let's just make sure, get the playoff schedule here. Game 6 or 7 will be in Houston, Texas tonight, and a Saturday if needed. The first game was won by the Astros 2-1. The second game 2-1, and then the Yankees won game 3, 8-1. And the next game 6-4 over the Astros, and the last game they shut it out. So if the Yankees win tonight, that could be, as they say, the end of the card. If the Astros win, they'll bring about a game 7. Period. And if you've not heard, I don't have the score up here from last night. We do. It is 11-1 there. The World Series, incidentally, will start in Los Angeles, Chavez Ravine, on the 24th. That'll be next Tuesday of October. And on Game 2, this will be in Los Angeles. Whomever will be there, Houston, New York. There also, and then we will move the series to either Houston or New York on Friday night the 27th, Saturday the 28th. That'll be Game 4. Game 5 will be on wait a minute here. On Sunday. I gotta get that right in a minute here. And if there is a game 6, that will be on Tuesday, return to Chavez Ravine, Los Angeles. And the last game on November, if there is a game 7, would be in Los Angeles. So that is the schedule. And we look forward to this World Series. And it'll be interesting. Houston's a very good team. The Yankees came more or less as the underdog. And we'll see where that goes. Our poor Cubs, they did make it to the championship series. I didn't feel they would even make it there, but they stumbled and bumbled into the National League Championship Series. and did manage to win 1 game out of 5. So it's on to next year for the Cubbies and Joe Madden and company, getting the mess of a bullpen straight. No doubt they will straighten that up during spring training. So now we'll see what the Dodgers are made of. The Dodgers have won 102 games, many games there. Between the Dodgers and Houston, they won more games than anyone else. But will the sluggers like Mr. Judge and company come together for New York? New York has pretty good pitching. Of course, they have Chappie, Mr. Chapman in the bullpen, and we'll see where that goes. Of course, Mr. Kenley Johnson is in the Dodgers bullpen. Dodgers have good starting pitching, and their relief corps is solid, and of course the Cubs found that out. This will do it for us. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the week that was, and we'll give the polling there. We're running over here, and we're running late. This will air about 10:30 Eastern Time.